Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a Dark Side. In 1989, Lawrence DeLisle, along with his wife Susan and their 4 children, drove their station wagon at breakneck speed into the Detroit River. This resulted in the drowning of all of their children. However, Lawrence and Suzanne survived. Was it an accident or was it murder? Let's get into the case of the DeLisle family right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, lambs, to a new episode of Love and Murder, your weekly true crime podcast telling you cases of heartbreak that turn to homicide. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, we're discussing a case of an unfair trial or actual murder. Before we begin, I want to say that this episode and all my episodes are sponsored by my lambs in Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. I just put out an update episode there to thank my Patreon lambs for all of their support. And as you know, without you, I wouldn't be able to go forward as I'm going forward now. So thank you very much. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now while you're listening so you don't miss a case. If you didn't know, you can also subscribe on our Patreon so you don't have to hear intros like this or commercials. You'll get Kai Rants, bonuses, and you'll be a sponsor of Love and Murder. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your delicious BJ's brand apple juice, murderandlove.com/BJ's so you can save $35 off of your first year's membership, and let's get into some Love and Murder. Now, not much is known about Lawrence DeLisle's childhood, but I did find out that he was a high school dropout, which, isn't a bad thing. Some people, drop out of high school for various reasons, and maybe he went and took his GED, whatever. He got married when he was 19 to Suzanne DeLisle, who was 23 at the time. He had a job as a service manager at a tire store in Lincoln Park, Michigan, making $31,000 a year. How much would $31,089 be now? Let's find out. So today, as of 2024, he would be making $98,927.90 a year. As a manager of a tire store? Wow. So basically, he was making amazing money back then. Lawrence and Suzanne had 4 children, ages 9 months to 8 years at the time of this case. Around July 1989, the family moved from a 2-bedroom townhouse in Taylor, Michigan to a larger house in Lincoln Park that had a yard that children could go out and play in. They continuously told friends how excited they were and how this would improve their quality of life for them and their children. Then about 1 month later, on the evening of August 3rd, 1989, Lawrence, his wife, and his 4 children were driving down Eureka Road, which is actually a dead-end street. The car was speeding, and instead of stopping at the wooden barrier that it has at the end of the street, the car accelerated and just drove through this barrier and plunged into the Detroit River. Lawrence and Suzanne were able to escape the submerging car, and they ended up being rescued by 2 men in a speedboat. However, their children, 8-year-old Brian, 4-year-old Melissa, 2-year-old Catherine, and 8-month-old Emily drowned inside the car. The car ended up being submerged under 25 feet of water. Now, witnesses said that Lawrence and Suzanne came up from the river in a state of shock and distress. This is how they described it. Suzanne was hysterical, screaming for her children as she struggled in the water searching for them. However, Lawrence was really calm and composed. Both of them were sent to Wyandotte General Hospital. Now, don't jump on me. I probably said that wrong. Please let me know the correct pronunciation in the comments below. And they ended up being discharged with not even a scrape on them. After they were discharged, police questioned them on the events of the evening. Lawrence said he was just driving and then suddenly his leg cramped, and this caused him to lose control of the car. So police said, well, yeah, you were driving about 45 to 55 miles an hour. And on that stretch of road, it's a 25 mile an hour zone. So in that sense, yeah, you were speeding down the road. So Lawrence was like, yeah, well, my leg cramped. I was trying to get my leg off of the pedal so I could stop. And at one point, like when we were even a block away from where the car ended up crashing, Suzanne did try to grab the wheel and stop the car, but she wasn't able to. Police Chief Edward Rothamel said, quote, "We haven't come up with a reasonable explanation for this very tragic accident." So police just didn't believe Lawrence's story of a leg cramp, and this is why all 4 of his children died and him and his wife survived. So they started doing an investigation. And personally, this is just a side note personally, I think I probably would have ended up drowning myself because I would have been continuously going under and trying to save my children out of the back seat. Or even before I got out of the car, I would have been trying to get my children out of the back seat. This is me, not judging. I'm just saying what I would have done. But then again, you know what? I'm saying this, but I've never been in that situation. So until you're actually in that kind of situation, you literally have no idea what you're going to do. You say what you're going to do, but then once you end up in that situation, survival clicks in and you literally have no idea what you're going to do. So I say this as someone sitting here with a microphone and has never been in this situation. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. So police went out and spoke to some witnesses. The first one they spoke to was Beverly Lake, who lived in a condo right next to this area, and her condo overlooked the street so she could see everything that was happening. And she actually was on her balcony at the time that the car crashed, and she said that she did see the car approach the riverbank slowly before making a sudden rapid acceleration through the barricade and into the river. She says the car looked like it was doing this deliberately. It wasn't swerving. It went straight and it showed no signs of braking at all. No braking, no swerving, no signs of trying to avoid this at all. Then they spoke with Brian Ross, who was on his boat on the river and actually saw this happening. He said the car got into the river and started submerging quickly. He said he saw Lawrence come up like a short time after the car submerged. He saw Lawrence come up. And Lawrence looked disoriented in his opinion, but he didn't look like he was harmed at all. And then Suzanne came up and she was further downstream, but she was like screaming and she was in a very distressed state and she kept calling out for her children. So this is what Brian Ross said. So after police had questioned a bunch of witnesses, they brought Lawrence in for an interrogation. This interrogation was on August 10th and it started approximately at 10:45 p.m. It then lasted into the early morning hours of August 11th. So they had him interrogating but when you say early morning hours, that could be midnight, 1 o'clock, but they had him in there for more than an hour. They had him in there for some hours. During his interrogation, Lawrence said a lot of things that could be misconstrued by the police. It could mean one thing, but to police looking for a murderer, it could mean another thing. For instance, he said, he had a lot of pressures at work. There were a lot of bills and his family responsibility was really stressing him out, which I talk like that every day, stress with the podcast, bills, being a mother and a wife. It's stressful. It's stressful for anybody. But if you just drove your car into a river and said your leg cramped and you couldn't control it and police are looking for a murderer, then those everyday comments could actually sound like, stress, bills, family. It could sound completely different. He also mentioned that 8 years earlier, he had tried to blow up his house by leaving a candle burning near a gas leak in the basement while his wife and son were sleeping. He said it was an effort to, quote, just blow up everything in his past. And supposedly, and as we get more into the case, you'll see why I'm saying supposedly, but he also supposedly said that he purposefully drove his family into the Detroit River. So all of this kind of just sounds like someone has been in interrogation for too long, and the interrogation, especially it's 11 o'clock at night, your children just died, you're blaming yourself. So you've probably not been sleeping. Then again, it's 11 o'clock at night, like I said, and they have you in interrogation all into the wee hours of the morning. It kind of sounds, and I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying what it kind of sounds like to me is an interrogation that went on for too long. And maybe it kind of twisted up their mind, like the Stephen Avery case. This is kind of what I'm getting. Like maybe when he said, yeah, I just wanted to blow everything up and start over, that could have been said sarcastically, but they're taking it seriously, which again, why are you saying stuff like this in an interrogation? But then again, he could be in a state of shock with everything that went on, or he could totally be the murderer. But with this whole thing about how long the interrogation lasted and, the stuff he was saying, I wanted to know, is there a law on how long you can interrogate someone? And I actually looked that up. And it's interesting to note that there are no laws on how long an interrogation can last unless you're a minor. As a minor, you can only be interrogated up to 3 hours. So I'm kind of torn on this because on one hand, I understand the psychology behind this, getting the guilty party to get tired and confess. But on the other hand, like if you're innocent, you get the same results. The person is so tired that they just say what they think you want to hear and then think that you're going to let them go finally. Anyway, in looking into Lawrence's background, investigators found that his father had committed suicide less than 2 years earlier in the same car. And there were even remains of the father's suicide in the car, evident in the car. This evidence were blood stains that were still visible in the car from the shooting. Now, no judgment, but I guess total judgment. Why would someone keep a car like that and have your kids driving around in it? I mean, maybe you didn't have enough money to buy another car, but at least clean the crap out of it? Bleach, hydrogen peroxide, all of this could help get blood stains out. I don't know, that's just me, but let's continue on. In addition to the lengthy interrogation, they also gave him a lengthy lie detector test, which basically is not going to work if your mind is already mush. So with the lie detector test, with the official confession that they claimed they got from him, and with him saying that he wanted to blow up his family 8 years ago, police arrested him and charged him with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempting to murder his wife. Now, after he was arrested, the media took this case and ran with it. So this actually became national and international news. There were stories even in Time magazine and the New York Times back then, where in the articles they would say stuff like, how can an average Joe, a typical dad with a good job at a local tire store and a nice home in Detroit, do this to his own wife and kids? These were the kind of articles that were going around. This was the kind of stuff that was being shown on the news, whether it was here in the US or internationally. People even started blaming Suzanne, speculating that she had something to do with the murders and she helped her husband to get rid of their kids. Like, she can't even grieve in peace. Because of all this news coverage, anonymous callers were calling their house and threatening to blow it up. And then I have to ask, like, if this is what you're thinking that he did, if you're thinking he is totally unequivocally the murderer and Suzanne helped, you blowing up their house, how does that make you different from them? So Lawrence's trial was actually scheduled for June 1990, but he petitioned his lawyers to file a request to suppress the reports from the interrogation. Basically, he was saying that he was coerced into a confession. Lawrence's lawyers said that the recorded interrogation, what you're seeing here, is nothing more than, quote, the ramblings of a tortured and tormented man. He reported that Lawrence said that his statements were the result of, quote, brainwashing, and he had been so sleepy because, feeling guilty of what he felt he did, that he didn't help his children, he couldn't stop the crash, stuff like that. He hadn't been getting any sleep. Also, news reporters camped out on his porch, harassing them, getting those threatening phone calls. He wasn't getting any sleep, neither was his wife. And he said the night that they picked him up for the interrogation, he'd only had like 2 to 3 hours of sleep. He also said that the police, pushed him into admitting that he did this because they said, okay, if you admit it, you're going to get a lenient sentence saying, quote, if you told the truth. And they also said that, you can tell us if you're suffering from a split personality. He also said that when he went for the polygraph test, they took him somewhere else. And while he was in the car, they blasted the AC and refused to give him a blanket. Then his lawyers also showed the judge testimony from a psychologist that said the police tactics, quote, had loosened DeLisle's grip on reality. So the lawyers did submit that. And on December 21st, 1989, the trial court agreed that his statement to the police had not been made voluntarily, the judge did agree that the police had used improper psychological techniques to get their, quote, confession. And then they agreed that they would suppress it. So then my question is, if you agreed to this, why wasn't he released? Because you literally just said he didn't voluntarily give a confession. I guess that could mean he's still guilty, but he involuntarily confessed, I guess. But to me, you agreeing to suppress this sounds like you agree that a confession was coerced, which means everything that happened in that interrogation should be dismissed. And shouldn't we take it all the way back to let's do some more detective work? What do you think, Lambs? Like, what does that mean to you? Now, even though they did suppress his comments and his, quote, confession for the purpose of the trial, his comments, his admissions, his confessions, quote unquote, were still used in the media. We're still going strong in international and national news. So there were newspapers saying that he confessed to intentionally driving his family into the Detroit River. Lawrence has been arraigned on multiple murder charges. DeLisle's confession ruled out. Prosecutor, DeLisle tried twice. And also there was even an article in the Detroit Free Press that said, according to the prosecution and the police, Lawrence had confessed both to, quote, trying to blow up his house in 1981 while his wife and infant son slept, and purposefully driving into the river to ease himself of financial burdens. So all of this is just, even though it's suppressed from the trial, what does it matter if all of this is going around in the media? Then some media representatives actually filed a lawsuit. They tried to sue the city, demanding access to the taped recordings of the interrogation. So on January 10th, 1990, the Michigan Court of Appeals allowed experts of the tapes of his interrogation to be played to media representatives. Right after that, the very next day, January 11th, headlines in the media said, quote, I don't deserve to live, and DeLisle tells of torment, stuff like this. So with all of this going on, everybody literally in the world following this case, how are you supposed to find credible, reliable jurors for a trial? Well, I'm going to tell you how. You can't. Every time they brought in people to serve as a juror, these people had already heard about the case. They kept changing venues. Jurors kept being dismissed. The entire process took between January to June of 1990. And even after the extensive questioning, the extensive process it took to choose jurors, all of the 12 jurors later said that they had heard of the case in the media. How is that a fair trial? And actually, I'll give you a breakdown of this after I tell you about the trial. So his trial started on June 11th, 1990, and the media was allowed unprecedented access to the courtroom. This marked a historical time in Michigan's history, in Michigan's judicial history, allowing photographers and TV camera crews in the courtroom to take pictures, to take video, and actually showcase this to the world. So Wayne County prosecutor Kevin Samosky argued that Lawrence was a troubled man. He was drowning in debt. He felt burdened by life. And it's just so much harder having a wife and kids. He said that Lawrence planned the crash. This was deliberately planned. And what he actually intended to do was die along with his entire family. Well, according to prosecutor Samosky, he actually planned to do a murder-suicide that night. So the prosecution called their first witness, Beverly Lake, which remember was the woman who owned that condo that oversaw the road. So she testified that on August 2nd, she was on her balcony with her parents when she first saw Lawrence's station wagon. And she said it was being driven at, quote, an extremely slow pace to the very end of the road. Remember, it's a dead end. So it just drove very slowly to the end of the road. It turned around and then it drove away from where the river is. And she said she remembers this specifically because she was being even more vigilant around that time, because there had been a lot of car thefts in the area. So whenever she saw a car acting suspiciously, she really took note of it. So being that it was just driving slowly down a dead end, I mean, even to me, and I don't sit there being nosy, and I'm not saying that's what she was doing, but even to me, that looks suspicious and I'm going to look. So I understand where she's coming from. Then the next evening, which was August 3rd, at approximately 9 p.m., she was on her balcony again with her parents. Then she saw the same car, she said, with the same driver and passengers in it. And she said that, quote, she recognized them specifically. And she said, once again, the car was driving, quote, extremely slowly to the wooden barricade at the end of the street. And after a considerable pause, probably 30 to 60 seconds, she said the car turned around and headed again away from the river. But then around 20 minutes later, the car came back, drove fast down the street, crashed through the wooden post, and quickly disappeared into the river. She said she heard the car, quote, shift into passing gear and then go into the barricade without, quote, swerving or deviating. And also there were no signs of braking. Then Beverly's mother, Goldie Hunt, testified the exact same thing. She said, this is what we saw. We all sat there and watched it in shock and horror. Well, she didn't say in shock and horror, but she said, this is what we saw. The prosecution then called other witnesses. I think they called up to 24 witnesses, if I remember correctly. But either way, they called many other witnesses who gave similar testimony. Irving Rosian, who is an engineer and an expert in accident reconstruction, he also testified that based on what he saw on the state of the car, it was more likely that the driver slightly moved the wheel to avoid an obstruction, and it wasn't apparent that the driver tried to jerk the wheel or swerve. So he's kind of going with what Beverly's saying. So they called in another accident reconstruction expert, Sergeant Weldon Granger, and he said the DeLisle car brakes functioned properly. After they took the car in, they tested it. The brakes did function properly. He said that while they were maintaining a full acceleration of 45 to 55 miles an hour, the brakes did indeed bring the car to a full stop. He also testified that there were no skid marks at the scene of the accident, and another sergeant also backed that up. But I do want to point out that Lawrence never said he pressed the brake. So I don't know why we're bringing in experts on talking about brakes or anything like that, skid marks or anything, because he never said he hit on the brakes. He said he had a cramp and his leg literally was down on the accelerator. And the only discrepancy I see is he said his wife did try to grab the wheel, and nobody is saying anything about swerving. There's no evidence of swerving. Beverly didn't see swerving. So that's the only discrepancy I see there. They then brought up Brian Ross to testify. He was actually in his boat at the time that the car went into the water, and he testified that the car did submerge in just a matter of seconds. And right after that, he saw Lawrence pop up, quote, right above where the car had gone under. He said Lawrence didn't say anything, and he also never went back, dove under to get anybody. He just, quote, was sitting there treading water. However, he said Suzanne, on the other hand, quote, popped up downriver and was, quote, hysterical. She was spitting water and started screaming, "My babies!" And then she'd go back under again. Now, that's the reaction I think I would have. So they brought up another person who was in the river at this time, Eric Stoneburner, to testify. And he said he was the one who actually pulled Lawrence and Suzanne from the river. He said that Lawrence didn't say anything when he was pulled into the boat, but Suzanne was, quote, screaming for her babies. He said also after Suzanne was pulled into the boat, her and Lawrence hugged, and then Lawrence, quote, said something to the effect of, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Which again, if he's blaming himself for this, yeah, he's going to say that. So then after all of that, defense attorney Frank Eman said that all of this was just an unfortunate accident due to a leg cramp. And also because of an engine throttle that became stuck. He also said that the only reason Lawrence, quote, confessed to the crime was because police wore him down with an 8-hour interrogation. So he had not slept. Because it's only, what did they pull him in? Like 10:45? He was probably still awake. And then they kept him for 8 hours interrogating him. Which was what I'm saying. That doesn't seem ethical. It doesn't seem like you're going to get the results you're looking for. Also, attorney Frank Eman said there was no attorney present. But did Lawrence ask for an attorney? Because if he didn't ask for one, police aren't required to get him one. And he also said that the police basically brainwashed him and gave him a, quote, kind of nervous breakdown. That I could see. Finally, he said that there was no way that Lawrence could get a fair trial in Metro Detroit because of all this media coverage. He's been, quote, stalked by reporters. Everybody's calling his house. It's all over the news. How could he get a fair trial? Then Suzanne took the stand and she testified that on August 2nd, the family had been out for a leisurely drive and they had driven down that road, Eureka Road. They were trying to get to this park that was nearby and they couldn't figure out how to get into it. So then they left. So remember when Beverly said she saw them driving slowly down the road, then they turned around and left. So that makes sense. She said the next day, August 3rd, the next evening, the family was out running errands and one of the children, Melissa, asked to go to the river to watch the boats. So they weren't able to reach the park by that road, Eureka Road, but they do remember, hey, the river was there, so let's use that road to get to the river. So again, they drove down the road. So remember again, Beverly saw them coming down the road. She said at one point in time, Lawrence stopped the car because his leg was bothering him. And so he stopped the car and started massaging his right calf for a few minutes. Then after a while, they just decided, you know what, the baby's crying. Let's go home. Let's just cut this short. So then they drove towards the water, but then they turned around. And as they were heading back home, they decided to stop at a drugstore to do another errand. And then when they left the store, he drove down this alley and he couldn't find a way to make a right turn to try and get back home. And that's when the alley again led them to Eureka Road, heading towards the river. So she said that's when she reminded him that you can go into any driveway here and you can make a U-turn and, turn back around. She said right when she said that, that's when he suddenly grabbed his leg and screamed that he was having a cramp and the car started to move forward faster. She said he grabbed his calf with his right hand to, quote, try and pull his foot off the accelerator, and that both of them tried to steer the car with their left hands, and the, quote, wheel was moving back and forth. She said that he did get his foot off of the accelerator. He was able to pull it off with his hand, not that his foot moved, but he was able to pull his foot off the accelerator with his hand, but she doesn't remember the car ever slowing down. She also said that this wasn't the first time the engine had, quote, raced. This had happened in the past, including sometimes when the car was in drive. So then one of the lawyers asked her, well, when we did the deposition, did you not say that the racing only happened when the car was in neutral? She said, look, I might have said that, but I'm telling you also it happened sometimes when the car was in drive. So after that, the defense showed evidence of the condition of the throttle, and they also called two expert witnesses, which was Weldon Grieger and John Yeager. Both of them testified that during one of the tests, the engine, quote, raced while in neutral, and the engine actually got more, and, quote, the racing couldn't be duplicated. So basically what they're saying is it did that once when it was in neutral. Then after that, the engine just started giving out. It started having other problems. I mean, it was in the water. So, and they couldn't duplicate that racing effect. But it did happen. However, it did happen while it was in neutral. So then they called forward a mechanic, James Coakwell, who testified that the car's accelerator cable was bent, one of the throttle plates did appear to stick, and the engine mounts were cracked. And all of this was before, being in the river, before the accident. Now, he said this car was, quote, dangerous because all of these problems could contribute to excess or uncontrollable acceleration. So literally, he's saying that what they're saying happened, he saw all the culprits in the car. So it is definitely something that could have happened. This is what the mechanic said. So as the case wound down, Lawrence chose not to testify. The trial lasted 8 days with more than 24 witnesses called to testify. Then, after less than 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Lawrence guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 5 concurrent life imprisonment terms. At his sentencing hearing, Lawrence read a statement which said, quote, "A father's job is to protect his children, and I failed. I panicked. I froze. That is my guilt, not murder. I was paralyzed with shock and unable to react. That is my crime." Suzanne also spoke at the sentencing, and she said that she thinks Lawrence was innocent. She does not think he murdered the children, and she doesn't think, he should go to prison. That's what she said at the sentencing hearing. Then the judge, while he was given the sentence, he said this entire thing bothered him and the sentence bothered him because, quote, "I don't know if he's guilty." So he didn't know if he was guilty of first-degree murder. And then he said again, quote, "I just don't know." Now, I promised you a breakdown of the jurors and the whole deal with the media. So 7 jurors admitted to some recollection of the accident. 7 of the jurors admitted that they did remember some of the accident being talked about, or they remembered that Lawrence said that the accident was caused by a leg cramp or a problem with his car. They remember this before they became jurors. However, they said that they hadn't heard much about the case, and if they did forget about what they heard. And their memories or lack thereof, what they had heard about the case, had nothing to do with their opinion on if Lawrence was guilty or innocent. So that's 7 of them. 5 of them said they did have knowledge of the suppressed statements. One of those 5 said that Lawrence had changed his mind of whether he did it or not. 3 of these jurors remembered that Lawrence had been pressured to confess. And one of those remembered that Lawrence did confess and remembered about the, quote, candle incident. So that's a breakdown of the 12. I know it sounds more than 12, but it's the 12 broken down into different groups. And some of those groups remembered more than others. So they might have remembered about the testimony, they might have remembered about the confession, and they remembered about the candle thing. So, even though you heard those numbers add up to more than 12, it was the 12 jurors and then broken down into different smaller groups. And some of those in the smaller groups had more than one memory of the case before they became jurors. I hope I made that clear. Now, when they did find Lawrence guilty, one of the jurors said that when they concluded and found him guilty, they also concluded that Suzanne was, quote, trying to save her husband, and they said that her testimony was a contradiction. However, all of these jurors denied that they had formed an opinion before they became jurors. Now, my thing is, out of all 12 of them, none of them formed an opinion. That's highly unlikely. I can see maybe one person wouldn't have formed an opinion, but all 12, I'm doing this retelling and I had formed an opinion. There's no way you're listening to this and you formed your opinion. I'm going to tell you what you formed your opinion on. You formed your opinion on whether you think he was innocent or not based on what I'm telling you. You've also formed your opinion on me, whether you like my retelling or not, whether I got information correct or not, according to you. Most people form opinions. So that's why I'm going to say maybe 1 out of those 12 didn't form an opinion, because that's very, very rare. I try not to form opinions, and I form opinions. So that's very rare that all 12 of them. No, I don't believe that. So, of course, Lawrence started filing appeals. He filed appeal after appeal after appeal. His attorneys claimed that the jury was poisoned by the publicity. They were poisoned by what the media was saying about the confession, quote unquote. And they think that the case should have been moved and it shouldn't have been handled in Detroit. But again, this was an international whirlwind. So where would you have done the case? So the appeals were mainly talking about the unfair trial conditions, the insufficiency of evidence, the jury saying that the jury was biased, with all members of the jury admitting to having previous knowledge of the case. They also talked about how the trial court denied having a bench trial, which they said could have given a more impartial judgment. They also brought up the fact that the police immediately suspected Lawrence of killing his children. Like, they were never impartial or open to considering any other scenarios. They were just like, he murdered them. It was on purpose. He wanted, freedom and whatever. And they didn't think beyond that. They also pointed out that the detective who was assigned to the case, Daniel Gillespie, actually contacted a Michigan State Police psychology asking for suggestions on the most effective way to interrogate Lawrence. The psychologist went ahead and recommended a special agent who was with the state police, John Palmater, and said he was an effective interrogator. They also said that you should try questioning Lawrence about his father's suicide. So it's like, bring up the trauma on top of this trauma and see how well he copes with it. Do you think he'll crack? Like, even I would crack, and I didn't even do anything. Then saying that they were going to take him to go take a polygraph exam at another precinct, the police actually took him to state police headquarters, and that's when Sergeant Gillespie and Agent Palmater hypnotized him in the course of a 6-hour interrogation. What is going on? And they videotaped, because it's 89, they videotape it. So they videotaped the session and it filled 2 tapes. I don't remember how long cassette tapes were. Was it like 8 hours or 12? I can't remember, but either way, it filled 2 tapes. Then at the end of this supposed interrogation where they hypnotized him, that's when he was arrested and they took him back to Detroit and booked him in and read his Miranda warnings. And then after that, they continued questioning him till 1 a.m., which doesn't make sense. You already made up your mind. You already arrested him. Why are you continuing to question him? Then the second interrogation was recorded, but only recorded on audio. And then that was transcribed as well. Then the next day, Sergeant Gillespie came out and spoke to the press and said that Lawrence had confessed. That's when he came out and said Lawrence had confessed to attempted to kill his wife and killing his children intentionally. Then after that, the mayor and the police chief announced to the media that Lawrence had, quote, confessed to everything and that his, quote, premeditation went back some time. So these are within a bunch of appeals. This wasn't all in just one paper. This was a bunch of appeals filed time and time again. However, the courts determined that, the jurors could remain unbiased and they could have based their decision solely on the evidence that was presented during the trial. They dismissed all the rest of the evidence that was brought forward. They said, we will not do a retrial. We will not change the verdict. We will not change anything. He's still going to remain in prison, guilty for his life sentences. These appeals went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear it. So Lawrence is still doing life in prison with no chance of parole, and he is currently in Coldwater, Michigan. He still maintains his innocence and says he will, even though he's in prison, continue to grieve over the deaths of his children. I also want to note that Suzanne did end up divorcing Lawrence, and this was after the trial, and she later got remarried. When Lawrence had a parole hearing in March of 2024, lawyers at that parole hearing read a letter from Suzanne saying that she now believes that Lawrence did kill their children and that he did try to kill her, And she said, this is what she's alleging, that she thinks she had been gaslit into believing that he was innocent during the trial. So that is currently her stance. And that is the case of Lawrence DeLisle. What do y'all think of this case? I'm going to tell you what I think. In my opinion, I think it was an accident with all the evidence that was brought forth. From what I'm hearing from the witnesses, what the car mechanic said, even the prosecution's accident expert said that they were able to recreate that throttle issue. And that was the prosecution's witness. So with all of that, I'm prone to believe that this was totally an accident. And the way they interrogated him, they hypnotized him, and then the jurors, I'm going to tell you, they were not impartial. I really believe that he's innocent. Like, I totally believe he's innocent. And maybe he should reach out to the Innocence Project and try and see if they'll take his case. I don't know. But I don't think he did it. And so that's the poll question I'm going to have for you. Do you think Lawrence is innocent? Yes or no? It's just a simple poll because I want to hear what y'all have to say. And if I missed anything in this retelling, maybe I didn't get all the facts, maybe I missed something or I misinterpreted something, please let me know in the comments below. You can do it respectfully. You don't have to come off like a jerk like some people. You could totally tell me I'm wrong respectfully, because when somebody respectfully tells me I'm wrong, I totally come on here and correct it. And y'all know I do. So if I missed something or if I misconstrued something, please let me know. If you think he's innocent, let me know that. If you think he's guilty, let me know why. Please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to go ahead and join our Patreon. When you join Patreon, you do get case extras. So like pictures, court documents, if there's any videos of the trial or anything like that, that is also given to you in Patreon. And that one you can get even at this $3 donation a month tier. So join our Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Become a supporter of Love and Murder and get some extras. Also, don't forget to share this case with everyone you know and everyone you don't. So go ahead and share this case we're talking about parents here, so your mom and dad. Ask them if they heard about this Lawrence case in the 90s. Do they remember this case? And share this with everyone you don't. So go ahead and share this episode in a true crime group. If you're in a true crime group in Facebook, go ahead and share this case in that group. You're going to share it to everyone you know and everyone you don't. And as we end each full episode, I want to remind you that it's all love and no murder, y'all. I'll see you in the next episode. Also, before I close out, next week's Midweek Mini and Florida Man Friday will also be AI Jane. This is the last week that's going to happen, unless y'all prefer it that way. I don't mind doing it. If y'all want me to only do Mondays and AI Jane does Wednesday and Friday, I am completely fine with it. But I wanted to hear from y'all what y'all thought about AI Jane. I tried to make it sound as realistic as possible and less AI, because that was when I did take breaks and I had the original AI Jane come on, her AI retelling was like, I couldn't even listen to it. So I knew y'all couldn't listen to it. So I really worked hard to make this AI sound more human. And I hope I pulled it off. I hope it sounded better to y'all. I was able to listen to it and actually enjoyed it. So I hope y'all felt the same way. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. Do you want AI Jane to do Wednesdays and Fridays, or do you want me to do it? However way you want. Do you want AI Jane to only make an appearance when I need to take a break? Let me know. I want to hear from you so I know how to move forward. I think I might put out a poll in the Facebook group. So sometime this week, I'm going to put out a poll in the Facebook group. So if you want to answer that poll, if you don't want to just leave your comment, if you want to answer that poll, then go ahead and join the Facebook group. It's After the Pod Facebook. It's, the link is in the show notes below. I need the feedback from you because I want to make this podcast as enjoyable to you as I can. I don't want to say enjoyable because it is a true crime podcast, but you know what I mean. So totally let me know. If you don't want to put a comment, then go ahead and join the Facebook group and take that poll. So I know what I'm doing moving forward. So this week, Midweek Wednesday and Florida Man Friday will be AI Jane, the new and improved AI Jane. And I'll be back again on Monday. And based on what y'all answer in the poll, I'll know how to move forward with it. So that is all I have for you. And I will see you next time.